Okay, I think that's nearly everyone. Well, good afternoon and welcome everybody. Well, it's good afternoon with us here anyhow. My name's Janet Hancock and I work in public services at the Public Record Office. So on behalf of PRONI, you're very welcome today. This is one of a wide programme of talks and events that we hold. And if you haven't already done so, you might want to consider signing up to our e-newsletter, the PRONI Express, where you'll get details of all our forthcoming talks. And Lindsay's going to put details of that into the chat. So this is the third in a 4-part series of sources for genealogy. Next week will be on the subject of street directories. In addition to that, in light of some technical issues we had on the first talk on census records, Des has very kindly agreed to do a rerun of that, which will be on the 16th, I think, Des, yeah, 16th?
Yeah.
Which is going to be pretty apt because that is just before the forthcoming decade census here, which will be taking place on the 21st of March. So very apt that we're talking census just in advance of our actual census. We'll also be adding a how-to video on the tithe records to go along with last week's talk, as we didn't quite get a chance to get that done fully. So as a result, this week Des is going to be doing his talk. That's going to be about sort of 40 minutes long, and then we've pre-recorded a little worked example to sort of give a bit of help and guidance to people so that you can understand how you can find some of this information yourself online. So we're going to be recording this series and today's episode, and obviously this will be made available on YouTube in due course. But if you don't want to appear in the recording in any way, you can switch your camera off, and indeed if you can do so, it often improves the internet stability across the board if people do turn their cameras off. You've all been set to mute, and that's just to avoid any background noise. So if you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll try and get through as many as possible at the end of the presentation. And also do feel free to say hi in the chat and let us know where you're tuning in from. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Des.
How are you doing? I'll start there. Okay, I'm going to talk about the PRONI Land Registry archive. It's an archive which is used sometimes for genealogical purposes, and it's got incredible potential as a genealogical archive. It's more often than not being used for legal purposes, and it's a crucial archive for property law in Northern Ireland. Now, everybody in PRONI finds it hard to get their heads around the Land Registry archive. I remember when I went into PRONI first, local farmers near where I live used to sometimes buttonhole me when they found out that I was in PRONI and asked me to check land registry boxes for them. Some gouger had a claim on part of their land and they had a shrewd idea that proof of ownership lay somewhere in those boxes. There were maps, there was ancient deeds, there was proof, the proof they needed. Something that needed proving, that could be proved. I figured back then that I knew most of what needed knowing in Irish social history, but I could see that land registry was a different world altogether and that I was horribly wrong. There were many ordeals ahead of me, but it's only through such tests that wisdom can be attained. I'm going to take you part of the way I traveled, and I hope it's not as painful for you as it was for me. It's a complicated archive, and I have a lot of ground to cover, so I'll be going fairly fast, but I want to keep it very logical and clear. I'm going to start with a summary account of the Land Registry archive, just to give you some bearings. The Land Registry archive is perhaps the biggest in PRONI. It consists of about 5,000 different parcels or bundles of documents, large and small, arising out of the sale of 4,200 different landed estates, made to about 112,000 tenant farmers in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland. These sales were carried out between 1869 and 1935. The parcels are stored in about 2,500 boxes. The archive continues to serve as a working archive for the Land Registry, but it's also accessible to the public. It contains a vast array of documents, instruments of title, reports of inspection and survey, vesting orders, maps, notes, and miscellaneous items. There could be 250,000 items within the entire archive, but this is no more than a guess. There could be many more. The present catalogue is serviceable, but limited in scope, and doesn't allow the researcher or archivist to analyse the archive much below the level of the different bundles. And that's why it's not as well known as it should be. Now, where did the Land Registry archive come from? The first thing to understand about the PRONI Land Registry archive is that although we've been calling it the Land Registry archive since the mid-1980s, this is actually a misnomer. It is not, in fact, the archive of the Land Registry. What I mean by that is that the papers in LR1 and LR2 were not generated by the Office of Land Registry. The PRONI Land Registry archive is actually one of the surviving parts of the registry of the Land Commission, the Land Purchase Commission Northern Ireland, dispersed after it closed down in 1935. Probably the biggest thing that happened in Ireland in the 19th century was that landlords sold their estates to the government, and the government helped farmers to buy the land they lived on. This work was done by the Irish Land Commission. The Land Commission started work on rent evaluation and land purchase under the 1881 Land Act, taking in a great deal of related business along the way. After partition in 1922, most of the relevant papers pertaining to land purchase were passed on to the Land Purchase Commission Northern Ireland, which completed their primary task by 1935. After that date, all other remaining administrative responsibilities were allotted to sections in the Department of Finance, Northern Ireland, and to Land Registry, Northern Ireland. The papers were divided up accordingly, they were divvied up. And the Land Registry took what seemed of value from their point of view, the kind of things they'd consult regarding boundaries, title, and rights of way, and lots of other things. Large tranches of records from the Landed Estates Courts, loan registers, purchaser files, and annuity casebooks came into PRONI from the Department of Finance in the 1960s and 1970s, and are now held under the references FIN 10, FIN 23, FIN 40, and FIN 48. It's not clear exactly when the Land Registry archive was deposited with us. It seems to have come into PRONI about 1985, that was my assessment, when Land Registry was moving office in Belfast and ran short of storage space. The catalogue we use now is what we got from Land Registry. In effect, the Land Registry archive is really an important part of the archive of the Land Purchase Commission, Northern Ireland. It might have made sense to have reconstituted this and other archives as a unified Land Commission archive, but it's hard to know for sure, and there's always a risk of confusion in doing something like that. Now, these meeting controls are terrible things. Okay, now I'm going to make a summary statement of what I'm going to say in this talk, because it's complicated, so I'll keep summarizing this, and hopefully when I say it several times, it'll make it clear. The Land Commission bought estates from landlords between 1881 and, these meeting controls, 1935. Landlords had to prove title to their land before the Land Commission completed purchase. Proving title meant finding and showing all relevant deeds of settlement, mortgage, conveyance, assignment, probate, etc., related to the history of the estate, gathering up those deeds. The Land Commission then examined the holdings of tenant farmers in order to prepare the vesting order, and that was the new title deed that farmer owners got. Finally, the Land Registry created folios on the basis of the vesting orders. The PRONI Land Registry archive contains title deeds of landlords and a mass of valuable documentation produced for analysis by the Land Commission. Now, here are the issues that I'm going to address in the talk consecutively. First of all, what is the Land Commission archive, Ireland and Northern Ireland? Secondly, what's title and how did title deeds work between 1170 and 1890 and later? What is the Registry of Deeds? How did the Land Commission organise land purchase between 1881 and 1935? Where does the Land Registry come into the picture and what did it do? How does a reader gain access to the PRONI Land Registry archival box derived from the work of the Land Commission on the land holding of his or her ancestor? That's what we'll get to at the end. Now, as a preliminary exercise, I'd like to compare the archives of the Land Commission North and South. The Land Purchase Commission, first of all, you can see the Land Commission in the Republic went from 1881 to 1992. The archives are in warehouse storage. The archive is intact. It's regarded as the single greatest untapped resource for studying the 19th century population of Ireland, but people can't get into it at the moment. However, the Land Purchase Commission archive, the papers from that, it's come into PRONI in several parts. One part is the Land Registry archives, and the other part are Ministry of Finance files. I'm only going to concentrate on the Land Registry archives at the moment. but that's incomplete, but it's available. Now I'm going to compare the two things so you can see. The Land Commission Ireland is intact. You can see church temporalities, quit rent office, congested district board, fair rents, purchase branch, records branch, advances collection. They're all there. That's the full Land Commission archive. And that's what would have been there in 1935 when the Northern Ireland Land Commission ceased. But it was broken up at that point, and this is what we've got. We've got Land Registry files, you can see them at the top in red, and then land judges, charters of Irish society, 1870 Land Act charging orders, registered of land and estates courts, fair rent files, fair rent registers, evicted tenant files, estate maps, tithe rent charge files, quit rent office files, land purchase commission papers, a vast amount of stuff. That's not everything that was there in 1935, but it's a great proportion of it, and it's mostly available. Some of it isn't available at the moment, but a great deal of it is available, and it's extremely valuable stuff. Now, why do people want to see the Land Registry papers? People come into the PRONI search room looking to examine bundles in the Land Registry archive all the time. Sometimes they come in because they're told by the staff of the Registry of Deeds or the Land Registry in the Land and Property Services Agency, LPS, to ask for the archive. Sometimes solicitors send people in. Sometimes solicitors come in. Researchers tend to inquire after the root of title to a farm or to part of a farm sold at some stage as a building site, or to look for information as to changing boundaries or rights of way in the countryside, or to be intent on assembling genealogical information as to family ownership and activities in a rural district between the 1880s and the 1930s. Less frequently, scholars visit to research the process of land purchase on a specific estate. Usually people come equipped with all sorts of vague assumptions about the nature of title deeds and property rights, which can cause confusion as to where they should go. Now, the archive was created originally to clarify issues of title and land rights, and it's difficult to understand without a philosophical and historical understanding of title. So what is title and what are title deeds? How far can you go back? Ordinarily, we need title or think about title only when we're buying, selling, mortgaging, or selling or leasing a house or land. Having title means that you're legally allowed to sell or pass on property. Until I started to think more clearly about title and ownership, trying to figure out what people needed in the search room, because I work in the search room, I had this vague notion that a title deed was a special document stating that a house or land is in the ownership of such a person. It was just a special document and the information was on it. I didn't know who had this document, perhaps the bank, but I suppose that if you lost this document, you might be in trouble. That's as much as I knew. And that's pretty well what's often in people's minds when they visit PRONI looking for title deeds. They inherit a house and they're shocked to find they can't sell it without a title deed, and nobody seems to know where that is. Alternatively, a person is running a farm and he's shocked to find that he or she can't easily prove ownership of a small field that a truculent neighboring farmer has decided to use for his cattle. Where's the title deed? They all shout out loud. Now, I'm going to start by giving you a working definition of title to simplify things. Title is the extent and nature of the control that a person has over property, land and buildings. There's currently two main ways in which title can be proven. There's a document known as a folio, which represents a title deed of the kind I was imagining. And if it exists, it can be found at the Land Registry. But these documents are very recent in origin, and they apply to many Irish farms and to some urban and suburban houses only since 1891. The other kind of title, which underlies all legal concepts of title, including the folio, is ideally embodied in a chain of documents showing how a property came into your possession, as opposed to one special piece of paper with your name on it, or your father's name, or your grandfather's name, and a description of the property. Where there's a problem regarding title, that is, where people are disputing ownership, it's normally proven by the evidence of a chain of documents made over time, such as mortgages, wills, conveyances, or indentures, or by witnesses in court. A deed is any legally certified document valid in court. The deeds prove interest or title in a property and enable the transfer of title. Conveyancing is a legal process under which an interest is safely transferred. A title deed is any document by which an interest in the land is created, transferred, or charged, buying and selling. At its most basic, holding title to a property, usually house and land, nowadays means being able to show where you got it and also what you're legally allowed to do with it. Until the 1870s, the only people in Ireland with title deeds to the land they lived on were the big landowners or the landlords, and a small number of farmers and merchants and certain householders in towns. Ordinary farmers held their land as tenants under contract to the landlord. When the state helped farmers to buy their land between 1870 and 1935, title deeds to each farm had to be created by the state. These new title deeds were issued by the Land Registry. Legally, these folios are derived from the older documents of title held by the landlords. You get the older document and then you extract the new document from it. They're like subdivisions of these older deeds. Now, the historical meaning of title deeds, how far can you go back? I need to say a little bit about the historical and practical meaning of title deeds. Some of this will sound like double Dutch, but when you look through the Land Registry boxes in PRONI, you'll be looking at all kinds of peculiar, archaic documents of title, among other things, and they will only make sense to you if you know where they came from. The title documents that you'll find in the Land Registry boxes are the instruments of feudal tenure held by the big landlords in Northern Ireland, dating back usually to the 1600s, but also further back. These are the roots of title for the ordinary farmer. Now, feudal title or tenure came to Ireland after the Norman invasion of 1169. The Normans drove through Wexford, through to Dublin, which they took in 1170, and then John de Courcy rampaged through East Ulster in 1177, built castles including Carrickfergus Castle, Greencastle, Downpatrick, Mott and Bailey, other things like that, and he occupied large stretches of land in Down and Antrim. This map shows you, with a little Carrickfergus Castle in 2012-25, shows you how much really east of the Bann was occupied by the Anglo-Normans. Now, under the feudal system, the Crown ultimately owns all land as paramount superior, and everyone else holds rights or estates in land from the Crown. Originally, the king gave a piece of land to a baron on condition that he supply the royal army with a number of knights for military service, together with tribute of money or in kind to support the king. The relationship was put into documentary form as a patent or charter. These were among the earliest documents of government in Ireland and England. Now, the big thing about the Normans is that they were very powerful military. They had armor, horses, that kind of stuff, and that made them powerful. But the other element of their power was bureaucracy and administration. Everything was registered in documents and held in documents, and that gave them a great deal of control. And that's where the kind of documents, deeds of title, come from originally. Now, the first Earl of Ulster was one of these barons in the 1180s. The baron divided his land into portions for each knight, who became a vassal of the baron in return for tribute and service. So it just goes down. The knights on each manor worked their lands by exercising force over a population of serfs who paid to live on the land by labouring for the manor. The barons and the knights held their lands in fee simple, which was a direct gift or the nearest thing to ownership. Fee simple means gift without conditions. In theory, they were the only ones who could buy or sell land or pass it on as an inheritance. In practice, this was unenforceable. Knights began to lease land to peasants above the common run of serfs, who assumed rights of inheritance and control of land separate from the common fields of the manor. In the course of time, most feudal services were commuted into cash rent, and land was bought and sold without reference to the interests of the Crown. Now, until the 1500s, however, the Crown continued to lay claim to a practical and financial interest in all dealings in land and property in the kingdom. So there's a little text box showing it. Feudal title, Pruton said property is theft. I think that's objectively true, as well as a subjective opinion. Title is gift. A title deed means where did you get it or who gave it to you. The person who gave it to you is the person who's the king is the thief. He gets the land in the first place, then he gives it to somebody else. And that's the way it works, essentially, in all title deeds in all societies. You can see there the names of deeds: fee simple, replavin, indenture, mortgage, demise, entail, fee farm grant. This is all Norman French. That's where it comes from. All created, the vocabulary was created in the 1000s, 1100s, 1200s. And it's continued today. There's a slight change at the moment, but we'll leave it at that. So the documents of title we use today and their meanings in court are all derived from the language of feudal tenure. Fee simple, now, okay, this is a kind of, I'm reducing it to 2 points. You own something if you're given something. Ultimately, all landed property is given by the Crown. Proof of ownership means proving the gift. The fee is proven in court if it's embodied in a deed or document. Here's an early deed in Ireland. An Anglo-Norman grant of land, 1174, Kilkenny, only a couple of years after they landed, very similar to the one that John de Courcy would have got. Earl Richard grants to William de Anglo, fee of 4 nights, extending to the water of Inishcorden. On the one side of the water, he shall have the fee of 40 nights, to be held in fee and heritage by the free service of 8 nights, witnesses, Raymond the Constable, Myler, son of Henry, Robert de Brummingham, etc. That's a typical early grant. Now, fee simple is as close as you can get to absolute ownership of land. So that means ownership of the most complete range of rights over land possible in a regulated society. Leasehold tenure, if you had a lease, it involved having hardly any rights initially, but evolved into something analogous to conditional fee simple by the 1500s. So a lease didn't mean much initially, but it gradually accumulated power. In Gaelic society, as in Anglo-Saxon society prior to the Normans, there were different forms of title. But the kind of title we have today is feudal in origin, so I won't go into that, it's too complicated. Now, the plantation settlement from 1610 meant a radical change of ownership and title in Ulster. The land of the chieftains O'Neill and O'Donnell and others who had rebelled in the 1590s and left for Europe in 1607 was confiscated and taken into the direct ownership of the Crown. This land was then allocated on unusual terms to the settlers and newcomers. Normally, an owner granted fee simple under Crown patent could only lease the land he held under the Crown. But Crown patents awarding land to settlers in Ulster in the early 1600s furnished some undertakers, as they were called, by special dispensation with the right to grant property and freehold to dependents rather than simply under lease. This resulted in the creation of a so-called fee farm grant, where fee simple, subject to perpetual rent, was transferred to a smaller landholder, meaning effective ownership subject to rent. You paid a tiny rent, a peppercorn rent, and you could do what you like with the property. On this basis, smaller landholders got fee farm grants or perpetual tenures from the bigger undertakers and began to buy and sell as de facto property owners, a small number. Many of the first settlers in the new plantation towns, craftsmen and merchants, were awarded preferential leases in perpetuity for the lots upon which they built houses and were also effectively owners. These feudal tenures were unique to Ulster and often to urban areas in the region. Now, deeds of fee simple or full title deeds were ordinarily held in the 1600s and 1700s only by the higher social ranks, as I've said, the landlords and merchants in respect of large areas of land. However, there was a significant minority of landholders and urban merchants who'd received fee farm grants, which were the legal equivalent of title deeds, although they paid small rents. The bulk of ordinary farmers held at will from the landlord or by short lease, but they still bought and sold land informally under a claim of tenant right. They basically regarded themselves as the owners, but they didn't have any legally valid claim. They sold the goodwill of a farm if they had to move or emigrate, and they expected their children to inherit the use of their farms in ordinary circumstances. So though they didn't technically have the right to buy and sell land, in practice, they often did what they liked, especially in Ulster, unless the landlord deliberately stopped them for some reason, in court or by force. It's the descendants of these small farmers who ultimately got title deeds from the Land Registry. Between the 1600s and the 1900s, the big landowners, the landlords, bought and sold and passed on their estates all the time. These transactions were recorded as deeds or instruments by solicitors in order to give them legal validity, and the papers were often kept in estate offices. I'm going to go through a bunch of them. These are documents which are in the Land Registry archive. Here's a probate, William Duncan. He left land in 1838. Here's a conveyance of land, a sale, effectively, on the Archdale estate in August 1843. These are mostly early 19th century, but that's just for convenience. Here's an indenture of perpetual lease from a church estate in August 1854. A mortgage in which Matilda Duncan gave money to Robert Stewart in August 1804. A record of memorial of disentail on the Archdale estate, a complicated deed which enabled the owner of an estate to gain new rights. It goes back to the Middle Ages, and it's a very interesting and complicated deed. Here's a renewal lease. This would have been a lease in perpetuity on the Belmore estate, and Christopher Humphreys would have had to renew it every so often for a fine. All of these documents are in the Land Registry boxes, and they go back to the 1600s and some further back. Now, until the 1700s, there was no adequate public ownership record. The documents were kept in boxes in the estate. The problem, of course, is that if there's no publicly available title deeds or records of transaction, people can make invalid claims. They can say, I own that land. And unless you can put your hand on the document, you can't really dispute it. And crazy disputes with each other that can't be settled can occur. Now, these are disputes between landlords. There's no proofs of ownership that can be enforced by the courts. And land can also be sold without the buyer knowing that it had been previously mortgaged, which is a huge problem. The first big reform in Ireland about this came with the establishment of the Registry of Deeds in 1708. This provided for the registration of memorials or abridged transcriptions of legal instruments of title, such as mortgages, conveyances, and the rest. The idea was that every time a transaction was carried out, land was sold, or something like that, a memorial was taken in the registry of the written deed. They copied down the gist of the deed. And it's my estimate by the 1780s and 1790s, it was standard practice for solicitors to enter memorials of all kinds in the process of conveyance. It still should be said that only the landowners and merchants had full title deeds to their property. That's the back entrance to the Registry of Deeds today. It's a beautiful building. Now, the problem was the records were complicated, and the legal process of conveyance became very expensive. If a landlord was selling land, himself and the buyer had to go through all the memorials in the Registry of Deeds to piece together the history of the estate and the burdens under which it lay, particularly the buyer. The Irish record system fell apart during the Great Famine in the late 1840s, and people started to think about whether it would be better to have one registered document called a folio, listing all the relevant transactions on the land instead of a document for every transaction, which all of the documents had to be put in sequence and analysed, and you never knew if you had all the documents. This brings us to Northern Ireland, the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, about 1860. The legal and social situation, just before land purchase begins. After the establishment of the Ulster plantation between 1610 and 1640, the farmers and labourers of the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, settlers and natives, lived as rent-paying tenants on about 1,000 landed estates, mostly owned by Protestant newcomers. The basic structure of rural land ownership and occupancy in the region didn't change much by the 1800s, although the number of landed estates over 200 acres in size rose to about 2,000. In the mid-1860s, as you can see from the table, there was about 126,000 tenant occupiers of land in the 6 counties. Most of them held about 10 or 15 acres of land. You can see there was about 40,000, if you look at the number of houses, there's about 40,000 houses that didn't have land. These were labouring households holding land in Conacre from the tenant farmers. So these are your ancestors. About 9,000, all of them, farmers and labourers. About 9,600 farmers and others, as you can see, if you look at the estates over 1 acre, held their land under fee farm grant going back to the 1900s. They owned their land, and they were effectively owners of their farms. There were small amounts of land, but they owned it. There was about 100,000 inhabited houses in the villages, towns, and cities of the 6 counties, mostly held in tenancy from major landlords or small individuals inheriting properties on perpetual lease from the 17th century. Now, until the 1890s, most Irish farmers had no legal right to buy or sell land, although they strongly believed that their farms belonged to them and their families. The title deeds were held by the big landlords and a small class of big farmers holding special leases going back to the 1600s. Nowadays, in England, Scotland, and Wales, most farmers are still only leaseholders. They don't own their land, while nearly every Irish farmer owns his or her own land, and they have rights of title over this land. How did this come about? Well, it came about through trouble. Agrarian agitation, the Land League, resistance by the Irish farmers. No rent, no landlords, land for the people, let the land thieves do their worst. Landlords get stuffed. This was particularly strong in the late 1860s and 1870s and the Land League agitation in the 1870s, early 1880s. Land League activity in Donegal in 1881-82, Eventually, Gladstone had to deal with it. And from 1869 to 1925, a series of statutes enabled tenants to buy farms from their landlords. The London administration reckoned that the only way to solve things was to accept that customary law was radically different in Ireland from England. And there was a sense of dual ownership of land in Ireland. That means that the farmers believed they owned the land and the landlords believed they owned the land. London didn't particularly care about the Irish landlords, so their solution to the problem was, okay, we'll buy the land off the Irish landlords and we'll sell it back to the tenants, and the tenants can pay us back over time. We'll effectively give them a mortgage, and that'll solve the problem. There'll be no more conflict. They'll get rid of the landlords, but that's their problem. We don't have a problem anymore. So there's a series of acts that did this. You can see them there in this table: 1869, 1870, 81, 85, 1891, 1903. That was a big one. 1909, 1925. The early acts, not many tenant purchasers. The middle acts, they were the big purchasers, particularly 1903 and 1925. It started under the 1869 Disestablishment Act. 1,200 glebe tenants in Ulster accepted the rather onerous terms of mortgage offered by the Church Temporalities Commission. They had to raise a stiff deposit and pay high interest rates on the mortgage, but half of them managed it. Now, under the 1870 Land Act, the state agreed in theory to help farmers to buy their land. But the borrowing facilities weren't much better than the earlier act, and only 400 tenants, the big tenants, took up the offer in Ulster. Now, one of the problems they began to find was that the state had to figure out how to turn the landed estates' deeds of title into deeds of title for the small farmers. As I said, endlessly, until the 1880s, the only deeds of title covered large areas of land. 1 parish, 2 parishes, 3 parishes. One person owned all that area. Each individual farmer, well, they might have a lease, they might not have a lease, but they didn't have a deed of title. And if you're going to buy the land, you had to have a deed of title. So, although the 1881 Land Act expanded the concept of tenants' right by legislating for fair rent, fixity of tenure, and freedom of sale, a land commission was established to administer fair rents and to handle tenant purchase. But the system was complicated, and they had to figure out a way of transferring title from the landed estate to the tenant purchaser. Still, very few people, as you can see, under 1881, took the land. So, a land commission had to assemble title deeds to investigate landlord title, and they had to examine tenant properties and income to make sure they could pay their mortgages from 1881. Under the 1885 Ashbourne Act, this broke the deadlock. There was a big increase, as you can see, in Ulster tenants taking up the offer. The increase was maintained by the Land Act of 1891, which increased the amount of funds for mortgages, and it did all sorts of other things. By the late 1890s, about 22,000 Ulster tenant farmers, still only about 18% of all the farmers, had bought their holdings on mortgage. The big one was the Wyndham Land Act of 1903. This accelerated the process of sale. By that stage, landowners had reconciled themselves to the way things were going, and they recognised the landed system in Ireland was being dismantled. There was nothing they could do about it. Under the older Land Acts, each arrangement for sale was made between the landlord and the individual tenants. So the landlord and the tenant literally sat down together, or the agent did. Big imbalance of power, very complicated. From 1903, landlords were given a financial bonus if they agreed to sale of the estate in units or groups of tenants. The numbers buying jumped greatly. You can see there, 57,000. Then, during the First World War, basically everything was put on hold. After partition in 1922, there was a Northern Ireland Land Commission and a Southern Ireland Land Commission, and they had to set up new acts. That started in 1924 and 25, and they changed the terms. And by 1935, in Northern Ireland, all of the farmers had sold their land. Every statute had different aims and different bureaucratic process leading to the creation of different forms and papers. So these are the papers under these Land Acts by the Land Commission, which made up the Land Purchase Commission Northern Ireland papers, the Land Commission papers, and then they were taken in 1935 and divided up between the Land Registry and the Minister of Finance, and some of them were destroyed. So the Land Commission assembled title deeds to investigate landlord title. I've mentioned that in the first couple of years after the foundation of the Land Commission in 1881, there was confusion as to how the title held by the landed estates could be divided up for the new owners. For example, the landlord had a title deed for a whole parish, but there was no title deed for each farm. So legally, one had to be derived from the other and specially created by the state. It was a new creation. The root of title for the small U landowners was the paper trail of deeds, settlements, mortgages, conveyances, wills and demises, scheduled by the agents and solicitors of the landed estate upon which they had been tenants. And I've shown you some of them. The transfer of land from landlord to tenant necessitated detailed scrutiny of title deeds to the estates, together with inspection and demarcation of tenant holdings going into purchase. The landlords had to prove the ownership before they could sell their properties to the tenants. And the state had to be sure of the boundaries of farms when they gave a mortgage to the farmers, and they had to be sure that the farmers would be able to pay them back. When estate title and tenant security were validated and arrangements for sale were finalised, the Land Commission issued vesting orders initiating the mortgage. They don't call it a mortgage, but essentially it's a mortgage. The vesting orders were posted to the tenant. In practice, the work was usually carried out in respect of a number of tenants together, and multiple vesting orders are made out. But individual vesting orders are also to be found. A vesting order was a basic but not very practical kind of title, and farmers weren't very good at keeping them safe. Much of the work of the Land Commission between 1881 and the 1930s was primarily an endeavour to consolidate and make sense of title prior to sale, clearing up all sorts of practical problems in disputed point of sale, allocating ownership of a range of rights and claims attaching to each farm, and dealing with a multiplicity of problems ensuing after sale, while the state collected annuities or mortgage payments from the new owners. For instance, the state was required to prevent subdivision of land while mortgage payments continued, and to ensure that leasing arrangements from over 11 months, conacre leases, were not taken out. Lots of these documents were taken by Land Registry in 1935 and boxed for office researchers. Papers in many Land Registry bundles include the conveyances, mortgages, wills, and other deeds of title, which I've said loads of times, going back to the 17th and 18th centuries. Schedules and abstracts of title, inspector's report on the estate and on tenant solvency, estate maps, which were the basis for Land Registry maps, administrative papers relating to the sale, vesting orders, agreements for sale, and maps of shares in Turbury, that's ownership of strips and bogs. Now, I'm going to show you a sample selection of these documents. This is what the Land Commission was producing between 1881 and 1935. And these are they collected all the title deeds and they put these documents, the working papers, into the Land Registry boxes. An originating affidavit, the landowner had to apply. This is from the Betty estate, County Down. An abstract of title on the Archdale estate. They had to gather up all the title documents and then show a listing and abstract it and have it certified. A schedule of encumbrances. They had to list all the debts and charges on the estate, so the government knew what they were taking on, because essentially the government was buying the estate. A schedule of tenancies, a big list of all the tenants on the estate when they were selling it, with all kinds of information about the acreage and other notes. Quite interesting stuff. Then a surveyor's report. He had to go out and he had to check that the boundaries were correct. Very interesting stuff. Here's an extract. John Thompson, tenant and occupation, is not the representative of William Craigs and John Hillary. Craigs and Hillary are the executors. Samuel Beattie bequeathed the holding to William James Beattie. He's in Vancouver. He approved the holding for sale in public auction in January 1914. Typical stuff. They did a map, and he's got all sorts of details. You can see there inset maps showing any kind of problem that needs to be recorded. Then there's inspector's report, and the inspector had to look at the tenancies and how they were working on the farms and could they pay. Here's an inspector's report, Archdale Estate. All sorts of details, notes, comments from the office. And I'll just read the top one. Catherine Bennett of Cronetownland, 1890. She's in occupation, lives in Mailbridge with a daughter, good security, no stock on the land at present, keeps them there in the summer, seems comfortable from what I could learn about her, reported to have money in the bank. And then the Graham brothers, Thomas Graham is about to go to New Zealand. Masses of stuff like this, amazing stuff. And then, of course, turf was very important. And sometimes if you've got a new cottage, your access to turf would change. So they said, okay, we don't want to go back to the old unsanitary cottages, but we have to be sure that we're going to get access to turf. So the inspector had to sort that out. Here's a big map of shares in the bog. So you get fantastic maps like that showing the piece of bog that everybody owned. Then you end up with a statement of sale, which summarizes all the financial and other administrative particulars. Then an account of the legal expenses, because obviously lawyers made money out of these things and legal expenses had to be charged to the estate. Then an agreement between vendor and tenant. So they had to finally agree between the vendor, the landlord, and the farmer. Finally, a multiple vesting order was issued. Summary conclusion. The Land Commission mediated sale of land from the landowner, the landlord, to the tenant farmer between 1881 and 1935. At the end of the process of sale, the Land Commission created a vesting order, vesting the land in the ownership in fee of the farmer purchaser. The Land Registry converted the vesting order into the folio, one single document embodying title to the property as this changes over time. The PRONI Land Registry archive holds the vesting order and the estate map with many other Land Commission documents. The Land Registry, LPS, holds the folio and the folio map. Now, Land Registry, what's that got to do with it? The papers of the Land Registry archive derive from the work of the Land Commission, but it's not possible to understand the purpose or place of these documents unless you understand the activity of the Land Registry between 1891 and the present. Why did the Land Registry come into existence? Well, from 1869, the farmers, the tenants, were being turned into small landowners. These owners were going to have all kinds of transactions. They needed to be able to buy and sell land and enter into commercial arrangements. And to do that legally, they needed evidence of title for business purposes. During the 1870s and early 1880s, it was assumed that just like the landlords, the small purchase, the little farmers would go down to the Registry of Deeds in Dublin to register their instruments of title and conveyance whenever they entered into a transaction. But by the later 1880s, it was recognized that this was obviously not practical. The costs imposed by the Registry of Deeds were much too high, and the class was probably not sufficiently educated or mobile to deal with a system like that. Unless you created a simplified system, then all the transactions would become chaotic and unknowable, and there would be a massive range of litigation in court. So the Local Registration of Title Act was set up in 1891 to set up a system of state guaranteed title to simplify future dealings in land. Under the Land Act, under this Title Act of 1891, all new purchasers it was mandatory for new purchasers to register with the Register Office, the Land Registry. Local registries are set up all around the country under a central registry in Dublin. The way it worked was the Land Commission brought it to a vesting order. The vesting order was sent to the Land Registry, which recorded the transfer of ownership from landlord to tenant and put it on a particular folio or sheet of parchment for every property. There was an official map of the land holding accompanying the folio. This made a land certificate was sent to the farmer. In practice, the Land Registry kept the land certificates and they were in the local offices on their behalf. From that point on, and this is the folio, all of the sales were basically the burdens were just written on a piece of paper. So you could find out the title deed for a particular farm and all of the burdens or easements and everything and the transfers of ownership would be written on that particular paper. You didn't need all these title deeds. Now, almost every tenant purchaser under the Land Acts between 1891 and 1935 registered their land. Some of the ones before 1891, they didn't get around to it. About 5,000 farmers on perpetual leases who had the fee farm grants, they stayed outside the folio system. And it's estimated that by 1935, about 85% of agricultural holdings in Northern Ireland and about 75% of land was registered. Most of the land in villages, towns and cities in Northern Ireland was held on long lease or fee farm grant and wasn't registered. From the 1960s, as cities and towns expanded, the number of folios increased dramatically. A farmer could sell registered land near a town to a builder for the construction of a housing estate. A new folio was opened for the sale of land, and then after each house was built, a new folio was opened for each house. So you could be on a little housing estate outside a town, and you would have a folio in Land Registry relating to your house. Landowners on unregistered land continue to use the Registry of Deeds till the 1990s, but it's now compulsory to register land at the point of sale or inheritance. And it's estimated that by 2050, all of the land in Northern Ireland will come under the operation of a land registry, and the Registry of Deeds will be phased out. When the Land Purchase Commission Northern Ireland wound down in 1935, the Office of Land Registry decided that a sizable portion of the commission papers would be very useful in its day-to-day workings. Eventually, it gave those papers into the custody of PRONI, and that's where we get the PRONI Land Registry Archive. Now, here's a folio map, very basic. How is the PRONI Land Registry Archive organised? Here's an example. The estate of M.A. Stewart, County Fermanagh. The catalogue is really a rough guide to the contents of bundles, boxes. A full catalogue has not yet been carried out. So for instance, there could be 200 items in a box, but the public list will only give directions to about 20 key documents or sets of documents. The papers relating to each estate sale are held in bundles. As I mentioned at the start of the talk, there's about 5,000 bundles stored in about 2,500 boxes. I'll use this listing for the Stewart estate as an example. The first part of the reference is LR1, Land Registry 1. The number of the box comes next, LR1 716 in this case. And the number of the bundle or folder comes next, LR1 716 2. In this case, there was just 2 bundles in the box. The documents from each sale are divided into 3 sections: administrative, title deeds, and testamentary papers, A, B, and C. The administrative papers are usually the largest in quantity, and they refer to schedules of tenancies, surveyors' reports, inspectors' reports, etc. There's a standard numerical sublisting laid out for the major documents of sale. For example, the reference number for the originating application, which I showed you earlier, for the sale of the Stewart estate is LR1 716 2A1. But there's loads of items in these boxes and bundles which don't have references. I've described some of these documents and how they came to be created, and I hope I've shown you how valuable they are in terms of title, ownership, and genealogical understanding, incredible historical value and incredible current value. You can't see these documents online, and you don't order individual items. Okay. Instead, the researcher has to find the correct reference number for the estate that you're interested in, and then you visit PRONI to order out the appropriate registry box or bundle. I've put together a short, pre-recorded segment explaining how you find the right LR1 number. And Lindsay is going to take this away right now. She'll show you the details. Process to show you how to find out the land registry reference number for a particular landlord and a particular tenant. I've chosen this guy, John Traynor of Crone Townland, Clonallen Parish, County Down, because we have to have some starting point. So that's who we're looking for. We want to know more or less when he bought his land and who was the landlord he bought it from, and then what is the land registry reference number that we need to find the appropriate bundle or box. So I'm going to go out of this now. The first thing we do is we go to the Griffith valuation. Griffith valuation, ask about Ireland. And I'm just going to see, I'm going to verify a couple of things. Clonallen, put in Traynor, down Clonallen, and I'm going to see what I get. There's a fair few Traynors there. I'm going to go to the first page. And when I bring that up, I find that it's Crone Townland in Clonallen Parish, and there's James Traynor, John Traynor, and it's an 11-acre farm, and the landlord is Joseph McCormick. So the next thing to do is, so now the finding is that in the Griffith valuation about 1864, the landlord was the Reverend Joseph McCormick for this fellow, John Traynor. Now, the next thing we need to do is to find when he sold his land. We know that he was in Crowan Townland, and we want to know when he sold his land. So where we go is, I'm going to go out of this, we go back to we go to the Public Record Office website, and we go to the valuation revision books. We've looked at the Griffith valuation. Now, every year an inspector came, after the Griffith valuation was made for the purposes of rates, every year an inspector would come along and look at the farm to see if it was bigger or smaller, if houses had been added to it, and all kinds of notes were made in the valuation officer's inspection books. And those are known as the valuation revision books. We have them in PRONI, and we've digitized them, and they're up online. So we're going to try and find when this land was sold. So we search the valuation revision books. Go through all this here. Now, I've already put this in: Crowan, Townland, County Down, and Parish Clonallen. Right, that's brought up the valuation revision books for the parish of Clonallen between 1864 and 1929. We can go through we can try and find out when this particular land was sold. So it may have been sold by McCormick, or it may have been sold by somebody else. I'm going to go to the period between 1901 and 1914. I know that this is when the first major tranche of sales occurred. So I'm just going to click onto this and find the Crowan Townland and see if there's an indication there that the land has been sold. Now, I go to the index image. I see that Crowan Townland is page 74. I go forward 10 images. I'm looking for the number on the top right-hand corner. It's a little bit hard to see. I'm now at 59, at 69. Now I'm going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, at 73, 74. Now I've got this is the manuscript version of the printed valuation that we were looking at on the Griffith valuation website. Now we have Crowan Townland, and it looks like the tenants have sold their land. If you see that LAP, that's Land Act Purchase stamp, that's an indication that the land has been sold. Now, it's not on that. The trainers aren't on that page, so I'm going to go to the next page to see if they've sold their land. There they are. Okay, James Traynor, and you can see in the second column, in fee, that means they own the fee simple, and I've discussed fee simple already. Then there's Land Act Purchase stamp, that means it's been sold. And if you look up further, you'll see that the lessor, or the landlord, now is Samuel Cooper. So Reverend Joseph McCormick was the landlord who owned it in 1864, but sometime between 1864 and 1900, he must have died, and probably Samuel Cooper inherited the estate. That's the most likely, that's what most probably happened. Purchases, landlords weren't purchasing estates really at this period for a very good reason. So we can see there that Samuel Cooper, the fact that he owned it when it was sold means that Samuel Cooper is the landlord who sold the land to James Traynor. So that's given us the next key bit of information, and we'll summarize that now. So Land Act purchase was from Samuel Cooper. James Traynor, 11 acres, Crowan Townland, land held in fee about 1914. So now we have to find out the registration, the reference number for Samuel Cooper. If we go back to the PRONI website, we can do this. Go back to the PRONI website. This is a little bit slower than it should be. I'll tell you, I'm going to click that off, and I'm back on the website, and we have a list on the website showing the reference numbers for every single estate sold under the Land Commission. Now you go to your research, then you go to Guides to PRONI Records, then you go to Guide to Land Registry Index, you go into that alphabetical index, and now I'm going to go to Cooper. Coming down here, great, I've got Samuel Cooper, County Down, 980. That's box 980. So now I know that the Cooper estate papers relating to the sale and purchase are in Land Registry box 980. Now the next step is we have another step to go, and I'm going to hide those floating controls. And I'm going to go back, and I want to see, I'm going to go into the e-catalog and find down the exact reference, go to search e-catalog. Now I'm going to go into browse at the top right hand corner of the e-catalog, and I'm going to put in L or 1/980. Now I've got that. Now I'm going to click there on the left-hand side, LR1 980. It's box 980, Land Registry 1, box 980. And you can see there's 4 bundles, and the 4th bundle is Samuel Cooper. So it's LR1 984. So we've got the reference number for the sale by Samuel Cooper. That means that the manuscripts in that box or in that bundle will relate to the sale of the purchase by James Traynor of his land, there's no telling exactly what it'll contain, but it should contain some very useful, interesting information, which was assembled when the Land Commission were carrying out the purchase and the sale. They were mediating the purchase. So when you're ordering it, you have to come into the search room. You can't order it online. You can't see it online. You have to come into the search room in PRONI when soon that'll be available, and let's hope. And you give us the Land Registry number, the reference number, and we'll help you to order it. You'll order it on a monitor in the search room. So hopefully that's clear. Thanks very much.